Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our EBA reporting out meeting this afternoon. We are going to start out, committee members, and have the analysts go through the packet. If there is something that you see that needs to change, just raise your hand, turn your light on, yell, something. And we will see what we can do to take care of that. Otherwise, we are going to just keep going unless I hear from you. And who is, Sarah, who's starting?
Patrick will be starting us off.
Okay, Patrick.
Okay. On page 1 is the Board of Public Works. The first recommendation is annual narrative, asking for financial and attendance data. The agency concurred.
Okay.
Second recommendation, this is a new grant. It's for the Thurgood Marshall Center. They're trying to make this into a national park, and we're asking for an update on how this is going, and they concurred.
Okay.
The next agency is the Executive Department of the Governor. DLS recommends concurring with the Governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 4, you'll see the Historic St. Mary City Commission. DLS's recommendation was to concur with the Governor's allowance, and the agency concurred. You'll also see a color page item for your consideration, and this would restrict $500,000 until Historic St. Mary City provided a performance audit consistent with professional auditing standards, and you'll see a couple bulleted items that outline what the audit should do.
Move to reject the first item and modifying and adopting color page item.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay.
Okay, now you're on page 7 for the Maryland Stadium Authority. The DLS's recommendation was concur. Agency concurred.
Okay.
Page 8 is the Canal Place Preservation Development Authority. DLS recommends concurring with the Governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 9 is the State Treasurer's Office. DLS recommended concurring with the Governor's allowance. Agency concurred.
Okay.
All right, now the Department of Information Technology is on page 10. The first recommendation here has to do with some MFR goals. We're asking for more value and cost data with the MFR goals here. Agency concurred.
Okay.
Second one has to do with the money that's in the dedicated purpose account for the cybersecurity improvements. We haven't seen a plan yet of how that's going to get spent and what the priorities are, so we're asking for some narrative to report.
Okay, good idea.
Agency concurred.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Third one has to do with the new VPN for a remote work project. Agency concurred.
Okay.
Okay. Now we are on page 12 for number 4. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided some cybersecurity money. It's unclear how this is going to be spent or even which agency gets it, so we've asked for clarification, and agency concurred.
Okay.
Page 13 is recommendation number 5. And this has to do with the resource sharing agreements. Apparently with the over-the-air broadcasting that they're doing, they're using the cell phone towers instead of more appropriate matrix to cost these out. So we're recommending they review this and report to us. Agency concurred.
Okay.
And the last one for the Department of Information Technology is on page 14. That has to do with the new Chief Data Officer and Chief Privacy Officer. They're getting over $3 million for this program, and once again, we'd like to know how they're going to spend that. So we ask for a report of the agency concurred.
Okay.
The Department of General Services on page 15. This is tying up $500,000, and it's to be used for the facilities maintenance. Their budget essentially is going to be 3 times larger next time, and we want to make sure there's money dedicated for this. So we're recommending this language. Agency disagreed.
Move to adopt.
Second. Okay.
All right, on the following page, page 16, second recommendation. This requires a report on State Center so that we have the latest information on it. This also ties up $250,000. Agency concurred in that they would happily do the report, but they would prefer not to have the money tied up.
Move to adopt.
Okay.
Bottom of page 16 is number 3. This has to do with the emergency procurement reporting report. Agency concurred with it.
Okay,
On page 17, the last item for general services is number 4. It has to do with the Managing for Results goal for their new training program. We think that if they're going to do it, they ought to measure it. Agency concurred.
okay,
The items for the Maryland Department of Labor begin on page 18. The first is a DLS recommendation to restrict 10% of the federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act that are going to workforce development programs, restricting 10% of those funds to be retained by the Department of Labor to provide oversight of these funds. The remaining funds would go to the local workforce boards. And there is a related color page. It's a loose leaf sheet. This would modify the DLS recommendation and instead restrict only $430,000 in those funds to be used for oversight, with the remainder again going to the local boards.
Move to reject item 1 and accept the color page.
Second.
okay,
All right. Back on the bottom of page 18, there's one color page item in the packet. This is language. It goes through to page 20. It restricts funding pending a report on the Power Apprenticeship Act. This is continuing up on narrative and reporting that the department has done the past couple of years on progress towards implementing this.
okay.
Second.
That's all for the Department of Labor.
Starting on page 21, this is MSD headquarters. Item 1 was a recommendation from DLS for language restricting personnel vacancies. There's a color page on page 22 with the recommended action with the same narrative, but without the budget language.
Move to reject and go ahead and adopt the color page.
On
Okay.
page 23, there is item number 2. This is a report on accounting practices, and the agency concurred.
Okay,
On page 24, this is a report on state education agency federal stimulus funds, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 25, this is a committee narrative for a report on virtual learning, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 26, this is item number 5. This is a status report on audit for Maryland School for the Deaf, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 27, this is a status report on the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, and the agency concurred.
okay,
And then on page 28, this is a color page for your considerations, committee narrative on a report on environmental literacy standards.
Move to adopt the color page.
here, yeah, okay,
Okay. Moving to page 30, this is MSD aid to education. Item number 1 is budget language for a report on maintenance of effort calculation. And there is an alternate color page slightly modifying the report request. The agency disagreed.
Move to reject and adopt the color page.
okay,
Item number 2 on page 31. This is budget language for a report on the autism waiver program, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 33, this is item number 3. This is a report on the non-public placement program, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 34, this is item number 4. This is a status update on the P-TECH program, and the agency concurred.
okay,
Then moving to page 36, this is MSDE funding for educational organizations. Item number 1 is annual language for the Aid to Non-Public Schools program. The agency concurred.
okay,
And then the next item is on Boost, and I believe you might want to refer these to the full committee. Is that correct?
correct,
Okay.
mhm,
So then we're moving to page 44, item number 6 on the non-public school nursing program. And again, I thought, I believe you wanted to refer that to full. Is that correct?
correct,
Great, thank you. At the bottom of page 44, this is item number 7. This is narrative on Ian's funding, and there's a color page item for your consideration, just slightly modifying the program to include ARPA funding.
Move to adopt the color page.
Second.
okay.
Moving to page 47, this is the Interagency Commission on School Construction. Item number 1 is language for 2 reports on the statewide facility assessments, and the agency concurred.
Adopt.
Okay,
Moving to page 48, item number 2, this is annual language on non-public schools and recognizes the intent for the program to serve both non-public and public schools. The agency concurred.
okay,
On page 49, item number 3, this is a report on public and non-public school safety grants, and the agency concurred.
okay,
And then on page 50, this is item number 4, the DLS recommendation is to delete general fund deficiency appropriation for a school facility assessments contractor. The agency disagreed.
Move to reject.
Second.
okay,
And then for your, at the bottom of page 50, there's a color page item for your consideration, which is a withholding funds pending report on charter and contract schools.
Move to adopt the color page.
okay,
And then on page 53, this is the Accountability and Implementation Board. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance, and there's a status report on managing for results measures, and the agency concurred.
okay,
All right, page 54 begins the actions related to the early childhood development programs under MSDE. This first item is DLS recommendation for narrative on the child care stabilization grants, including the, how that funding was spent by the providers, in addition to other information there, and MSDE concurs.
okay,
Okay. On page 55, there's an additional item for your consideration. This also is narrative related to stabilization grants for childcare providers, specifically on MSD's processing times to distribute those grants.
Move to
Okay.
adopt color page.
Okay. On page 56, item 2 is also narrative requesting a report on MSDE's major IT project to modernize its early childhood data system. MSDE concurred.
okay,
On page 57, this is, would be language restricting $10 million in general funds under the Child Care Scholarship Program, pending the submission of a report on the spending on the Child Care Scholarship Program for expanding income eligibility and increasing reimbursement rates. MSD concurred with this language.
And move to adopt the color page, which just removes the restriction.
Yes, right, I apologize. Yeah, there's a second item on page 58 that would basically ask for the same information as narrative and wouldn't restrict the funds. So.
Second.
good eye, Senator.
I've got one good one, Madam Chair.
Y'all are much quicker than I am. And then item 4 on page 59, this is narrative requesting quarterly reports on the Child Care Scholarship Program expenditures and enrollment. There is an alternative to that. It's numbered color page 3 on page 61. This just adds requesting information on by jurisdiction. So it's asking the same information.
Okay,
But
okay, thank you,
On page 63, this is the Maryland State Library Agency. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
okay,
Page 64, we have Morgan State University. The DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
okay,
Page 65 is the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. The recommendation was to concur, and the agency concurred.
okay,
okay, on page 66 is USM overview. In the recommendation concur with government allowance, the agency concurred.
okay,
And on page 67, we have Bowie State University. The DLS recommendation was to adopt committee narrative concerning the nursing program, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 68, I have a color page item for Frostburg State University, requesting a report on increasing the capacity of their physician assistant program.
okay,
And on page 69, for Coppin State University, the DLS recommended action was to see the University System Maryland overview for system-wide recommendations, and the agency concurred.
okay,
On page 70 for University of Baltimore, it's the same thing, to see the overview for system-wide recommendation, agency concurred.
okay,
Page 71 for Salisbury University, same thing.
okay,
Page 72, for UMGC, it's going to be the same recommendation.
okay,
On page 73 for University of Maryland, Baltimore County, again, the same thing, recommendation.
okay,
And same on page 74 for University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences.
Okay.
On page 75, we have University System Maryland Office. The recommendation was to see the system overview for recommendations. However, I do have a color page item that would restrict $200,000 to provide a grant to the Global Virus Network. However, there was subsequent request, and I have a loose leaf color page for you that would make the restriction in University of Maryland, Baltimore.
Okay. Okay, we're good.
Okay, turning to page 76 for Maryland Higher Education Commission. First recommendation restricts $100,000 to a report is submitted on the status of correction actions related to the last fiscal audit. The agency disagreed.
Move to adopt.
Okay.
On page 77, this is the second recommendation is the annual report on institutional aid and Pell Grants and loans by UC. The agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 78, the third recommendation was a request for an annual report on the 55% completion goal. The agency concurred in part, requesting the change the due date to January 30th. However, down below it, I do have a color page for your consideration, which will restrict funds until the report is submitted by December 15th.
Move to adopt color page.
Okay.
Turning to page 79, I have another color page item for you. It's on 79 and 80, requesting a report on the status of implementing recommendations to on awarding credit for prior learning.
Okay.
Turning to page 80, for the Stellinger formula, the DLS recommendation was to restrict funds until a report is submitted on how institutions will use the increase in funds to support the state's higher education goals. However, I have a color page for you on page 81, which would turn this into narrative.
I move to remove the restriction, just turning it to narrative.
Okay.
All right, turning to page 83, aid to community colleges. The DLS recommended action was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Okay.
Turning to the next page, page 84, student financial assistance. Item number 1 was a request for narrative concerning the impact of the credit completion requirement on financial aid awards, and the agency concurred.
Okay.
Right. On the very next page, page 85, the second request was for an update on the Next Generation Scholars post-secondary outcomes. The agency concurred.
Okay.
And turning to page 86, state support for higher education. Item number 1 was a request for instructional faculty workload. However, there's a color page associated with this request that would remove the requirement for the University of Maryland, Baltimore.
Okay. Okay.
On
We're
page,
together and we're all set. Okay.
okay.
Yep.
On page 87, this was just a technical amendment, so to reflect the actions you just took, you would reject this.
Okay.
Turning to page 88 for Baltimore City Community College. Item number 1 is an update on the institution's realignment. The agency concurred.
Okay.
Item number 2 concerns an update on enrollment in the Mayor's Scholars Program. However, there is a color page associated with this on the next page, page 89, that would consolidate this into a single report.
Move to adopt the color page that makes it only a single report.
Okay.
Turning to page 90, this is a request for an update on information technology infrastructure renovations. The agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 91, this is Maryland School for the Deaf. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 92, this is the Maryland African American Museum Corporation. DLS recommended concurring, and the agency concurred.
Okay.
On page 93, this begins the items for the Department of Commerce. The first item is a DLS recommendation to reduce funding for tourism marketing by $2 million in general funds. This is because there is federal funding available.
Move to
The agency disagreed.
move to reject the funding
Yes.
decrease. Sorry.
Okay.
Then there's a color page item on the bottom of page 93. This would add language restricting $500,000 in the Tourism Development Board for a grant to the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore.
Okay,
Move to adopt.
Second.
On the next page, page 94, there's another color page. This one is narrative, requesting a report from the department on how they do marketing for the Small Minority and Women-Owned Businesses account and the budgeting for marketing.
okay,
Move to adopt the color page.
And on page 95, there's a third color page for commerce. Again, narrative, requesting a report related to the More Jobs for Marylanders program and how the department is encouraging participation in Tier 1 counties.
Move to adopt the color page.
okay,
And on page 96, this is the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, or MEDCO. They're a non-budgeted entity.
okay,
So on page 97, this is the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, or TEDCO. The DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurs.
okay.
And that's all we have.
Do we
Went
move it as
fast.
an adopt? Do we move the whole thing? Madam Chair, I would move to adopt the subcommittee report.
Okay, there's a second? All in favor? Okay, we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.